So 3 years ago, on June 15th, 2021, with just 4 days' notice, June 19th became an official federal holiday. For many white Americans, and indeed for some Black Americans and people of color, this was the first that they'd heard of Juneteenth. So today I'd like to take a little bit of a look at what Juneteenth is and what it might mean for us today. On June 19th, 1865, 159 years ago, and 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves in the rebelling Confederate states, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and issued General Order 3, which stated, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Following Granger's proclamation, the formerly enslaved Black Americans broke into celebration. These celebrations have continued annually, and while they have evolved, they often include religious services, inspirational speeches, stories from formerly enslaved people, games and contests, singing, music, and of course, feasting, lots of really good food. Additionally, clothing has been an important aspect of Juneteenth celebrations. Journalist Nadra Karim Niddle writes, for formerly enslaved people, making a distinction between their lives in captivity and their lives as free people was essential. And one way to do this was to wear bright and lively clothing, something they were not allowed to do when they had been enslaved. Popular colors became black and green and red, the colors of the Pan-African flag, as well as red, white, and blue of the American flag. If we are not Black, we may be wondering if we can participate in these celebrations. Should we go to the festivals? Should we dress up? And the truth is, there's not one easy answer. Some Black people believe Juneteenth is absolutely not for white people, while others invite anyone who wants to come and learn. Certainly, anyone who does attend a Juneteenth celebration should do so respectfully and having educated themselves on the meaning of the day, both historically and for today. In some celebrations, it works really well to have non-Black volunteers contribute labor, like helping to dish out food or clean up the trash, to enable Black participants to more fully enjoy the day. So if you are the type of person who wants to do something, being in a supportive role like this so that others can celebrate might be a good option for you. But first and foremost, if you do not identify as Black or of African descent, and you do attend, go respectfully. Plan to listen more than you speak, and be aware of the relevance Juneteenth has to some in the Black community. Juneteenth has become the most widely observed emancipation celebration in our country. This year, corporations and companies are engaging in performative corporate activism about Juneteenth, much like they do for Pride Month. And by performative corporate activism, I mean that they are visibly celebrating Juneteenth without actually changing or examining their oppressive policies and practices. One HR website suggests your company might have a picnic or a diversity day speaker as how to celebrate. But many of these corporate events perpetuate a harmful myth about Juneteenth. Because, beloveds, the story that says the poor folks of Galveston just didn't know slavery had ended, bless their hearts, that is simply not true. The white slaveholders in Galveston absolutely did know that slavery had ended. News had gone out to the country via telegraph. They continued keeping Black people in bondage because they could. Writing in the Jewish independent newsletter, The Forward, Robin Washington excoriates the myth that neither Black nor white people had had any clue that slavery had ended. Indeed, he cites sources indicating that even the enslaved people in Galveston knew. Yet the slaveholders, he writes, nonetheless kept them in bondage, not by cunning or deceit or ignorance, but by the brute force and tactics of dehumanizing torture that they had been using for 200 years. General Granger didn't bring liberation by words on a scroll, Washington writes, but by troops with fixed bayonets. Beloveds, white supremacy holds on tight. While Juneteenth is a celebration of the end of slavery, it also recognizes that white supremacy will not go without a fight. So rather than talk about whether or how we might celebrate Juneteenth, I want to talk about how we might collectively honor it. And all of us, no matter our race, can choose to honor Juneteenth. Honoring Juneteenth might start with educating ourselves about what abolition, what ending slavery, means for us today. I hope we are all on the same page when I say that life in this country is still a struggle every day for many Black Americans. One member of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists told me that for them, a holiday means little when there are food deserts in African American neighborhoods. Black people are still traumatized by police, attending segregated, underfunded schools, afraid to go shopping for fear of being gunned down by white domestic terrorists, followed around in bookstores or in parks, and whose history and contributions to the United States of America are erased in textbooks. And the way Black people are treated in this country is especially a problem when it comes to our carceral state, which includes prisons and jails and also our systems of policing and our legal system. That's what the carceral state means. Brian Stevenson, founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, author of Just Mercy and UU General Assembly Ware Lecturer in 2017, says slavery gave America a fear of Black people and a taste for violent punishment. Both still define our criminal justice system. Beloveds, we know that Black Americans are 6 times more likely to be sentenced for prison for the same crime as a white person. We know that 1 in 3 Black males born in the past decade can expect to spend some time in prison during his lifetime. We know that police violence against Black people is so epidemic that civil rights demonstrations have shut down cities across the country as millions of people marched to protest police brutality and to proclaim that Black lives matter. Now, I know that some of you may work for the police or are lawyers or are employed by other parts of the carceral state in other ways. And you might be starting to feel pretty defensive because you're probably working really hard to make a positive change from the inside. So let me be clear, the system is the problem, the carceral state itself. I'm not attacking you or how you make a living, but as you well know and would likely be the first to admit, the systems that you work within have serious problems. Writing in Global Policy, Tyron Woods explains, with roots in the racial slavery of the Atlantic world, the criminal justice system of the United States presents a clear case study in modern slavery. Each historical period since the end of the Civil War has contributed to a massive system of control, to the point that the US now has 2.27 million people behind bars, with an additional 5 million people under community supervision of some kind. The US rate of incarceration remains by far the highest in the world. The degree to which the US is out of pace with the rest of the world's humanity is that a full quarter of all prisoners worldwide are held in US jails and prisons. And the US incarceration rate of 639 per 100,000 people is 5 to 10 times higher than other industrialized democracies. 65% of the total US prison population is Black, despite Black people comprising only 14.6% of American society. Because non-Black people of color are represented in the prison population commensurate with their demographic present in the US society, the criminal justice system bears a specifically anti-Black character that directly indicts its place within the US's long-standing status as a slave-holding society. In fact, the connection between slavery and our carceral state is enshrined in the Constitution. The 13th Amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Woods points out that this amendment does not actually abolish slavery, but instead relocates it into the domain of the criminal justice system. Debates about mass incarceration today point to this feature of the 13th Amendment and consider it a loophole or a design flaw, whereas instead, the clause in question is a design feature historically consistent with the original agenda of the war to extend, not end, Black enslavement. So what you do see is that slavery is only okay if someone's convicted of a crime, see? And then you make LWB, living while Black, a crime through things like Jim Crow laws and unjust drug laws, and voila, you have your slavery, but it's not called that anymore. Woods writes that since criminalization is first and foremost a political symbolic tool, it refers not to individual behavior, but rather a racialized construct of human worth. A racialized construct of human worth. In the United States, we have embedded a racialized construct of human worth that says Black people are wrong, are bad, are criminals, and are unworthy. Juneteenth is a day that calls us to work for Black liberation, to work for the abolition of slavery, not just 150 years ago, but for today. Our modern system of policing and mass incarceration is a racialized construct of human worth that specifically says Black people are not worthy. But can't the system be reformed? That is often the next question that arises when discussing abolition, both today and historically. I believe that just as slavery couldn't be reformed and should have been ended, our carceral state, from police to prisons, can't be reformed and needs to be abolished. Now, to be clear, abolition doesn't mean having no way of keeping the populace safe. It means having a system not based on a racialization of human worth. It means something that looks a lot more like what other countries have, where people are not targeted because of their race, where people in prisons aren't dehumanized, and more. And I don't believe we can get there from here, from where we are now, because reformation does not threaten the existing structures. It doesn't address the root cause of this racialized construct of human worth that is the very foundation of this carceral state. Black TikTok creator T. Monet did a powerful video on two different types of allies. She said, historically, there have been two types of allies. If we think back to the period in which slavery was the law of the land, there were abolitionists who had wholesale rejection of the evils of the institution and wanted it done away with. But there was also a second group of well-meaning, well-intentioned folks called good folks who didn't reject the institution. They just had issues with the way the enslaved people were treated. T. Monet says, so I need you to ask yourself, If you want to do away with my oppression, or you just want to improve the conditions of my oppression. Because, she says, when I hear that word reform, that speaks to me about you improving the conditions. Some things, she says, need to be destroyed. Colin Kaepernick puts it this way. He said, suggested prison reforms, new jail construction addressing overcrowding and addressing the dehumanizing living conditions, and technological monitoring that essentially creates open-air prisons have not and cannot eliminate the harm of the carceral state. The thread that ties all of these reforms together is the increased investment of capital into the carceral apparatus. Understand that? The increased investment of capital into the carceral apparatus, it actually makes it bigger. Ultimately, Kaepernick says, I realized that seeking reform would make me an active participant in reforming, reshaping, and rebranding institutional white supremacy, oppression, and death. And so, beloveds, when I tell you that I believe we must abolish the policing and prison system in this country, this is not a political statement. It is a religious one, founded in my belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It is based on my studies, on my reading, on my conversations with folks from broad walks of life, and it is grounded in my personal history as an activist in Louisville, Kentucky, home of Breonna Taylor. I believe it is an affront to our faith as Unitarian Universalists that we live in a carceral state based on a racialized construct of human worth. Our principles don't tell us what to believe, they tell us what to work for. And if we are going to work for a world consistent with our principles, then I believe that the real work of abolition continues today, and that this is part of working for Black liberation that Juneteenth invites us to work for. Now, I understand you might not agree with this stance, and that's okay. We have freedom of the pulpit and freedom of the pew. We do not have to be of one mind. Unitarians weren't of one mind about slavery 160 years ago. This is hard work, beloveds, and we are not always going to agree, but we cannot let this disagreement stop us from working together. And if we stay engaged in the work of racial justice, we are going to make mistakes. We will hurt each other in the process and have to make repairs to get back into right relationship. Oh, I know, I have made so many mistakes and missteps. But I don't believe that we can let disagreement or fear of conflict or fear of making a mistake stop us from struggling with how to overcome these systems of white supremacy culture in ourselves and in our communities and in our country. We must not let disagreement or fear of conflict or fear of making a mistake stop us from struggling with how to bring about the end of the racialized carceral state in this country. And we must not let disagreement or fear of conflict or fear of making a mistake stop us from struggling with how to bring about racial justice more broadly. This, I believe, is how we honor Juneteenth, whether or not we celebrate it, by working for Black liberation, knowing our work will be imperfect and insufficient, and doing it anyway. I leave the last words to another Unitarian Universalist Black elder who wrote, "We cannot afford to treat Juneteenth like most of us treat our warm weather holidays like Memorial Day, Independence, and Labor Day. That is, with the emphasis primarily on grilled meats, alcohol, and friendly gatherings. It is important that we use Juneteenth as well as other means for reminding all Americans that the Civil War has not ended, and that the most important battles in that war will likely be fought during the next 10 to 20 years. May it be so. May we make it so.